Monday, February 10th, I woke and quickly packed everything up, hitched up and left Eureka at 9:30 to head towards Eugene. I knew I had a long day of driving ahead, and there were a couple different routes that I could choose from. The faster route included Highway 199 from Crescent City off the coast, which people said is like the scary part of Pacific Coast Highway 1, but more freeway. And the slower route was further up the coast on the 101 to Reedsport, but then a fairly easy route on 38 to Highway 5. So, hey, I chose the latter because I was getting an early start, and how often do I get the opportunity to drive up the coast? Well, even though that 340 miles took 8 hours, it was the right call. Why didn't anyone tell me that the Oregon coast is so breathtaking? There are now 3 towns that I'd like to visit along the 101. The Smith River, Port Orford, and Coos Bay, which definitely seems like the kind of place Popeye would live. It's so quaint with all the boats and all the wonderful things to do there. And so I'm definitely going to come back in the summer, bring my kayak and maybe do some fishing. So I kept driving, and as I was going more and more north, approaching that 38, I completely psyched myself out just before getting on it at 4 p.m., having no idea what the heck road I'm about to get myself into, only to find that it is just as breathtaking, with a huge lake, rivers, green open fields with sheep all over, and the best part, it's flat. So I made it. I pulled into Deerwood RV Park at 5:15, and it's a lovely woodsy little park just south of Eugene. Off to Jameson's Bar for a well-earned martini, where I met a few people who told me the best things to do here, and now I have a plan for the next few days. I'm so excited to see what tomorrow brings. My first stop on Tuesday was to the Shelton McMurphy Johnson House, which is a historic landmark of Eugene. It was built for Dr. Shelton, and they had it until he died in 1893, and then their daughter got it, so there's where the McMurphy came in, and they raised their family there. And then in 1950, a couple, Eva and Curtis Johnson, bought it, and Eva Johnson lived and worked there until she died in 1986. But I was just intrigued by this house. It just kind of seems like the kind of house you want to go in and see what's going on in there and see what the rooms look like and the furniture. And I knew there was going to be phenomenal textiles, of course. So lots of lace, lots of crochet, filet crochet. It was really interesting to see how they use those things. You know, their nightgown, and I assume this is a wedding dress. Just one quilt. Here's the little quilt on the bed. You know, the kitchen with the old stove and all their kitchen tools. It was just kind of cool to meander through the house, you know. The kids' room was interesting because it had these dolls and all these old toys, but it also had the tiniest sewing machines I've ever seen in my life. Look at these little guys. And then I went up to the top floor where they had a dollhouse, like a miniature version of the house, which was amazing. And all these old medical implements, and I'm looking at them like, what the heck are these for? And I see this. Yikes. So yeah, I probably spent maybe 30 minutes in there just walking around the house and just looking at all the old antique stuff, which I love. The next few stops I wanted to make were all on the same block in the Market District, so that made my trek pretty easy. The Smith Family Bookstore has been around since 1974. They buy and sell new and used books, and it is massive. They had every kind of book you can imagine. And as you might also imagine, this was my find. Right across the street was the local loving favorite, Morning Glory Cafe, where I can grab some coffee, some breakfast, and sit and read my new books. And this food was incredible, all organic, healthy food. But hey, where's the bacon? No one bothered to tell me this was a vegan establishment. But hey, I'm in Eugene, when in Rome, and it was really delicious. And this is mushroom gravy, and you know I'm a big mushroom kick now, so. Just a few yards away, I found Mecca. Mecca is a community art exchange program where they take donations of like craft supplies and old jewelry and yarn and fabric, and they give to educators. They help people in need. The supplies are supporting events and gatherings and fundraisers, and they try to keep things out of the landfills. In the past 5 years, they have diverted 311,000 pounds of materials from going into the waste stream, and then they donate it. So it's a really cool program. It looks kind of like a big trash to treasure sort of garage sale. That's awesome. Everything's like really cheap. I got some embroidery thread and a little bundle of fabric, and then also I found a piece of leather, because apparently if you use leather on your rocks after sanding with really fine sandpaper, they'll get all shiny. So yay, I was looking for leather anyway. It was perfect. That evening, I went to the Wild Duck Cafe upon my son Josh's recommendation. He was just there a few weeks ago and took $300 out of a machine in there. So I thought I'd try my luck at Annie Oakley. But I lost $20. And I was hungry, so I got something I had never gotten before. Duck tenders. So yummy. Wait. There are ducks everywhere in here, staring down at you. I might not have thought that one all the way through, but they were really yummy. Wednesday, I woke to this haunting and quiet view. This does not inspire an uprising from the bed, let me tell you. I was thinking of visiting a waterfall today, as there's so many within a 60-mile radius. But it's more driving. Plus, I wouldn't be using the number one rule, which is use the buddy system when hiking through the forest. Plus, I don't have my bear spray. Plus, there's snakes. Plus, it's super foggy anyway. Plus, I saw this review of one of the waterfalls around here. What? Maybe next time. I think I'll stay in bed today and work on this week's project, which I'm very excited about. It's the mesh bottom bag for rock and mushroom collecting. And I love being in my trailer in the woods with the windows all open. Sometimes it's not about all the sights that I'm trying to see and the attractions to hit in a city, but it's just about being in a different place with a different atmosphere, different birds, scenery's completely new. I'm in my jammies, I got Attenborough on, I'm sewing, and I am just going to decompress from all the driving I've done lately. It's going to be a good day. I finally did get up, though, that evening and went to another favorite local recommendation, which is Sam Bond's Garage, where they have live music every night, but Mondays where they have bingo. I already love this place. I'm not even in the door yet. The drink menu was divine, and I drank Blueberry Hills all night, played cribbage with my new friends Kate and Kenny, and filled my gypsy soul with this gorgeous band, Tug and the Heartstrings. Friday morning, I packed up to leave Deerwood RV Park and head up to Forest Grove. I know nothing about Forest Grove except for that's where my friend Shelley lives. Shelley is the producer of thequiltshow.com, which is where we met and became friends. She's kind enough to allow me to vagabond in front of her house for the weekend and show me a bit more of this precious town. Her family goes back at least 4 generations here, and I got the lay of the land. I got to see her childhood home and the tiny bedroom she shared with her sister. There's so much character and love here. I'm beginning to see why people stick around in Forest Grove, Oregon. Then we went to Main Street, where we found a lovely knit shop, the Naughty Lamb, which is a beautiful store. Brought back all kinds of good memories of when I had my knit store, Knitty Cat. We went to Daniela's gift shop, where I procured a few sweet little trinkets. Very cool shop with different gifts that I've not seen before, so kudos. I love that store. And then we went and had a bite at the local Ridge Walker Brewery. We got back, played a few rounds of cribbage, and just before I said goodnight and headed back to the trailer, I noticed her meaningful story blocks that had a message for me. Geez, it took me long enough. I had to stand back to see the forest, I guess. The next day, she made breakfast and we hopped in the car so she could show me the beauty of her favorite local winery, Montanori Vineyards. I said, well, we're not stopping here without doing a wine tasting, are we? Well, no. So in we go. We tasted their fine offerings and took a few bottles to take home. Then we made dinner and she treated me to Verboort sausage, which is a Dutch tradition, and the sausage was made by her family. Sausage, sauerkraut, and honey, and it was delish. I got to play with some of her beautiful fur babies. If you need cuteness overload, Shelley's got it in spades. Here are a few of her 7 kitties and her bunny Ula, who is a big fan of treats. She's the cutest creature I've ever seen. Shelley, thank you so much for your warm and welcoming hospitality. I can't wait to come back in the summertime for another visit and to learn more about the town you call home and love so much. The mesh bottom bag I designed originally to collect rocks because when you pick up the little rocks from the beach, all the sand comes with it. And at the end of the day, you've got this bag of wet sand. So I thought if I made a bag with a mesh bottom, hopefully most of the sand would fall through and I would just be left with the rocks. But what it's also good for is mushroom harvesting because mushroom spores are airborne, and proper mushroom picking etiquette apparently is using a basket or some sort of woven receptacle to pick up the mushrooms so that the mushroom spores can spread as you walk through the forest. And all you really need to make it are just some scraps of fabric, this screen, some yarn if you want to do the granny squares going up the side, which I use sock weight yarn, really small, sporty sock weight yarn, and a 2.5 millimeter hook. And then a bigger yarn, the sport weight yarn, and a cotton is probably best since you'll be out on the beach and cotton is breathable and it dries. And I used a 3.25 hook. So I think that's the equivalent to like a B and a C, but just play with it and make sure that your stitching is solid in there. And I took one of the Gypsy Satchel Kits because I have a surplus of those in my Etsy shop, and just use the fabric in there. And I figure I can make 2 bags out of the materials in the Gypsy Satchel Kit. So if you're looking for a make and take project where the materials are all together and you can just make it and go, check out my Etsy store. I've got lots of colors. This is the Santa Fe colorway that I've been wanting to see what that looks like, so I grabbed that. And then there's a bunch of beads and embroidery floss that I'm not going to use for this project that I'll use for something else. So, but really it's just a scrap using project. So of course my favorite kind. So I went over to the hardware store and I got some screening, and it's not like normal metal screening. It's more like it's got a plastic feel, so it's real pliable, but it's strong. So I cut that to a 6x8 piece, and then I just trimmed up the sides by cutting up the line. It's really easy to look at that and figure that out. Then I folded it in half so that the piece was 8x3 inches. And then I took one of the yarns from the kit, and 4 squares in, I just whip stitched around the raw edge, the sides, to close it up. And as you're whip stitching, just make sure that you're looking at the other side too, because when we fold it out and spread the mesh out, it'll create a nice straight line, almost like a satin stitch going down the side. It's really pretty. So just be mindful of both sides as you're stitching and just keep coming straight down the line, whip stitching. It's really simple. Just take it slow. And then when you get down to the end, make a knot in the yarn with itself through the screen, and then weave the ends up and down the outermost part of the whip stitch. I want this bag to lay flat, I want it to set up when I set it down, so I'm going to make a gusset. And how you do that is you just fold the piece so that the seam that you just sewed is running up the middle, as I'm showing here. Place the point on a ruler or a marking grid, and 1 inch down from the point on either side is where you're going to do a back stitch. So place it down on your surface at the 1 inch mark on the left. If you're sewing right to left, place a pin so you know kind of where you're aiming towards, and then start a back stitch with the same yarn just down that one string of the screen, that one window path, and back stitch it closed and just knot it on both sides, and do that for both sides so that you've got a bag that's actually square rather than a flat bottom bag. When you get to the end, just sort of whip stitch the yarn back in to the stitches that you made, and then weave it up the main seam and knot it and just weave it in and tie it off really good to secure it. When you turn the bag right side out, you can see the seam is really pretty on the side, and you've got these two little gusset flaps that are on the inside. When you turn it outside, you can kind of pinch the corners to establish a side, the long sides and the short sides. So the bag will measure 5 inches across and 2 inches on the sides. And, you could leave the gussets just as they are. I wanted to sort of stitch them down just so that they're not flapping and rocks won't easily slip under them. So I just took the same yarn and at the very corner just did like 2 little stitches just to stitch them down to the very bottom, and then of course knot it and weave it back into the main seam. To make the main sides of the bag, I did a hand-stitched log cabin block. So here, you could do anything. You could even just do a solid fabric and just quilt that however you want to, with embroidery stitches or just regular, straight line quilting, meandering quilting. You could take an old quilt block that maybe you have and cut it down to size. This ultimately will be trimmed up to 5¼ inches, these pieces. So old quilt block, you can follow what I'm doing here. I took the fabric from the kit and I just cut strips that were between 1 and 1½ inches. I just cut them with scissors. This could be a wonky piece. We want this to sort of have that just sort of handcrafted look. So if you're going to make the log cabin, just start with a square that's approximately 2 inches. I think this is just a little bit less. And then start stitching pieces to the side. So the first one, you'll match up a strip to the square, cut it to size, and then just take a normal sewing thread and needle and make a running stitch to stitch the side to the square. When I'm hand stitching pieces together, I like to leave that 1/4 inch from the side open, and I stitch a 1/4 inch down from the top. And I do that because I don't like to nail down the seams as I sew. It gets too bulky. You'll see what I mean as you watch the progression of this log cabin square. But that way, when you're flattening the piece, the seams can kind of go anywhere they want to go. When you lay a block down and you're trying to lay the seams down, they'll gravitate towards a certain side, and I just feel like pressing it to that side is the best way. So just stitch the first piece, open it up, turn it a 1/4 inch to the right or left, it doesn't matter, just be consistent. And then take your next strip and lay it across the top of the sides. And then cut that to size and then stitch that on and keep rotating the piece to the right, putting on a new strip, rotating to the right. A log cabin, if you're already a quilter, is a very basic thing. This is probably the easiest block in the world to do, especially because we're just making it kind of wonky and eyeing up the seams, and it just makes it so much easier and faster and kind of more fun. And then here's where I was talking about, like, when I encounter a seam, rather than stitch that seam down, I just stitch through the base of the seam, or I just skip it all together, just kind of get a stitch on either side real tight and then just keep going. And it's easier too if you sew it where the seams are facing you, it's a little bit easier, but either way, you can sew it from either direction, whether it's the strip that you're sewing on, or you can sew it from the block that's already in progress. Just don't nail down the seam. You'll see what I mean when you open the block. And just continue adding the strips around. I went counterclockwise. Again, you can go clockwise. It doesn't really matter. Just be consistent if you want like a true log cabin. But since we're being wonky, you can really add it to any old side you want to. Keep adding strips until the piece measures over 5 1/4 so that you can trim it up and that the sides are even. I think ultimately my piece maybe measured 5 3/4, so I just trimmed the block to 5 1/4. The first thing you want to do is just put a ruler over your block, making sure that you've got the full 5 1/4, and then trim up just a hair so that you've got a nice straight edge on 2 of the sides. Then take those 2 sides, line it up with the 5 1/4 mark on your ruler, and then trim up the last 2 sides so that you've got the 5 1/4 inch block, and then obviously make another one so that you've got the other side. To make this side a substantial, nice, solid bag, we're going to want to quilt it. So what I did was I cut a 5 1/4 inch piece of batting and backing. I just used a piece of fabric from the kit. And what I've got here is 3 strands of DMC floss. And again, just used a piece of embroidery floss from the kit, made a knot in it. And you don't want any knots on the back, as little as possible. So just come up through the batting and start in the square. Stitch, running stitch that is 1/4 inch or so away from the seams and do the whole square. Then exit the needle into the next piece, like the first piece that you stitch on, which in my case is this little sort of steel gray blue piece, and then run the stitch just up the middle. Make sure you're catching both the batting and the backing in your stitching. And when you go from fabric to fabric, just bury the needle under the thread to come up to the middle piece, the middle line of the next fabric in a row. So really you're just quilting, hand quilting this in a spiral. When you're finished with the thread, just run it up the side through the batting and knot it at the end, because of course we're going to cover these raw edges. So you can put a knot here at these raw edges, and then choose a new thread, a different color, because we're making this kind of wonky and fun and using what we have sort of look, and tie a knot, and then just start right where you picked up with a new thread and a new color. And of course, all of this can be done by machine, especially the piecing of the block. But frankly, I really like this big stitch quilting. It kind of gives that happy hippie hands at home sort of feel to it, which is beachy, which is, I'm in Oregon. It just feels right. And I love the look of a hand quilted piece. So personally, I think it looks better, but of course, if you're just like, oh, I have no time for that, just run it through your machine really fast. It's not a big deal. Once you have your two squares quilted and they're feeling good and just got that scrunchy handcrafted look, take 4 more strips that are 6 inches by 1 inch, basically, and start to sew on one side. It feels like adding a log cabin. So you're gonna just flip it over, match the raw edges, stitch the piece onto the block. You don't have to come all the way through to the back. We're really just trying to attach this to this side, and then we're going to fold it under and stitch it to the back side. We're using these strips as a binding to match the edges. And the reason why you want to keep them 6 inches is because it's easier to just trim them at the end, and then also we're going to have to fold under the ends at the corners so that we don't have raw corners with these strips. You finish that first seam, turn the block over, and fold down the raw edge of the strip so that it matches the raw edge of the block. And you can leave a little bit of space for turning. And then turn it over once again, and then you have a nice binding that covers all of those icky raw edges. So just pin it in place, and with a regular sewing thread and needle, just do a applique stitch, a binding stitch is really what that is. And you come out of the fold, come across, pick up. You don't have to come all the way through. Just pick up like a piece of the batting behind the fabric and come up through the fabric, maybe 1/8 of an inch out of the fold again, and then just continue stitching down the line until you're at the very end of the seam. Okay, and then for the next strip, you're gonna repeat the exact same thing. The only difference is at the beginning, you want to fold the first side, the side on the right, you want to fold it under 1/4 of an inch at least, so that you've got a fold when you go to fold the raw edge and then fold it back under the back. You've got a nice fold on the side, which you'll then stitch up. The other end doesn't need the fold because that's going to get covered by a folded end as well. The only side that you're going to fold both down is the last side that you put on. After you're finished sewing that piece on, go back and sew the little fold together so that it covers all the raw edges. And basically you're just going to pick up like the outside of the fold and then come around to the other side, tuck the other strip in, kind of just use your needle to tuck it in, and then come back on the other side and pick up the fold on the other side, almost like lacing a shoe, and just stitch that up, knot it, and bury the thread. And then, of course, just remember on the last side, fold both of them in. You're going to need to stitch up the fold on both ends. And then your block is complete, and it's time to sew it to the screen. I've already done the first side. And what you want to do is just put the next square on the outside of the screen top edge, and just make sure everything is lined up. Make sure that the corners match up with the corner of the gusset. And then you want to just lay it on its side and keep making sure everything's lined up. Put a couple pins in. Okay, make sure everything's lined up, and then flip it back over and turn it inside out. It's a little easier to stitch when you don't have to reach inside the bag. And then take 3 strands of DMC floss and hide the knot like in the corner, come out the corner of the square. And then again, just like you sewed up the sides, take the needle through the block, the binding in the block, and then come up 4 squares, and then just start stitching it in place. You're just going to whip stitch it all the way around. until you get to the end, and then of course knot it at the end. And then in keeping with our happy hippie hands, I thought it'd be super cute to do little mini granny squares going up the sides. So we're going to make 6 of those, and I just of course used the yarn that was in the kit, so it's all coordinated. The first thing you want to do, this is a really easy granny square, the first thing you want to do is make a magic ring, and that's just by holding the yarn over your hand and then taking the yarn and putting it over 2 fingers, reaching inside that loop, and just grab the yarn, chain 3, and then do 15 double crochets inside the loop, making sure that when you're double crocheting, you're going around both the loop and the tail, because you're gonna, in a magic loop, you pull the tail to gather the circle closed. So when you've got your 15 double crochets, then you're going to slip stitch to the 3rd chain of that beginning chain 3. Instead of pulling the same color through, what you're going to do is pull the 2nd color through, which in my case is the white. So put your hook into that stitch and pull the white through instead of the blue. And then here we're going to establish the corner. So we're going to make this little circle into a square. So in the next stitch, go ahead and slip stitch and then chain 2, which will count as your first double crochet. Make a double crochet into the same stitch, chain 2, and then make 2 more double crochets in that same stitch. So you've got a little corner there, a little right angle. And then in the next 3 stitches, you're going to work a half double crochet, and that will be this side. So that's 3 half double crochets in a row. And then in the next stitch, you're going to do the corner again, which is 2 double crochets, chain 2, 2 double crochets. And then just keep working that until you get to the beginning. So of course, after the corner, it's 3 half doubles, then do another corner. You get the idea. And then when you get back, you're going to slip stitch to the top of the beginning chain 2. Slip stitch with the same yarn into the top of the 2nd double crochet, and then you're going to slip stitch into the space, and then this time you're going to bring the 3rd yarn through, which is my multicolor here. And then from there, chain 2, do a double crochet, chain 2, and then 2 more double crochets. So it's like working that same corner. The first chain 2 being counting as the first double crochet. So you've got your corner. And now we're going to run across the side. So we're going to skip a little bit. We're going to chain 1, skip a stitch, do a double crochet in the next stitch, chain 1, skip, do a double crochet in the next. By the time you get back to the corner, you're going to have 4 chain spaces with 3 double crochets along the side. So just make sure you're chaining 1 in between so that when you skip those stitches, they don't bunch up. And then after your last double crochet, before you get back into the corner, make sure you chain 1 and then work your corner again, which is 2 double crochets, chain 2, 2 double crochets, all in that same space. So work that pattern all the way back around to the beginning. Slip stitch in the top of the chain 3, slip stitch in the top of the double crochet, and then when you reach the corner space, you're going to do 5 single crochets all in that corner, but no chains in between them. So this round is with the same yarn, and we're just establishing a more solid side so that we can stitch them all together and they're not floppy. So after you work your 5 single crochets into the space, now you're going to work single crochets all the way across. So you're going to alternate between working in the chain space and the top of the double crochets along the side. So it's just single crochet, there's no chaining here. Just single crochet in the double crochet, single crochet in the space until you get to the corner space, and then you're going to work 5 single crochets in the corners without chaining, remember. So all the way around, slip stitch it to the beginning, and then cut the yarn and weave in the ends. And then stitching the squares together is pretty simple. You're just going to match up the stitches starting in the 3rd single crochet in the corner, so that middle one, and hold them like I'm holding them here. And just again, like whipping up a shoelace, you're just going to go through the stitch matching up on either side. So every single crochet will get stitched into, and just from the inside coming out, work the yarn all the way up to the other end and then knot it. Just sew 3 little granny squares together so that you've got the sides of your bag. To get the granny square sides on, what we're going to do is crochet them up the side and then go ahead and stitch it across the bottom. It's a lot easier that way. So I did mine with the right side facing because I like this corded look. Remember, that's kind of a little bit more happy hippie hands. And so, but in the inside, if you like that better, then just turn the piece over, and then this is what you'll have on the outside. You know, it's a little bit more of a flatter piece. So, but in any event, what you want to do is be able to establish a line across the fabric that you can crochet into. And of course, you know, my old standby is the good old blanket stitch. So up through the corner, I'm gonna start my needle. And what I have here is a 6 strands, all 6 strands of DMC floss. Okay, and then from the end there, take the needle and every 1/4 of an inch or so, just pick up some of the background fabric and then come right out the fold. Make sure the thread is behind the needle. And then again, basically just every 1/4 of an inch or so put in a stitch. And don't just pick up the binding, pick up some of that background so it's a little bit stronger. And I think about a yard will be fine to be able to do this in one thread where you don't have to change threads. Okay, so it's just straight up. Make sure the thread is behind. And then just do that for both sides. Okay, once your blanket stitch is all done and knotted, we're just going to run a little line of single crochet chain 1s so it's easier to attach. So single crochet, chain 1, and just go ahead and work a single crochet into the top of every blanket stitch line. Okay, so just do that all the way down, end it here, and then start with a slip stitch down here, and then work single crochet, chain one all the way up to the top, and then weave in those ends. Okay, so once you get the sides crocheted, this is again where you can make the decision whether you're doing this with the right side facing you, or you're going to turn the whole bag out and do it with the wrong side. So it just depends on if you want that smooth side, or if you want the cording on the outside like I have it. So just begin with the crochet hook, same crochet hook, which is 3.25. I hope I mentioned that before. And some sport weight yarn. This is I'm just using the cotton that is the main yarn for the Gypsy Satchel to work this and the handle. So the first thing you want to do is just anchor it by putting it into the first single crochet. Work a single crochet and chain one, and then work in the chain spaces from now on. So go into the chain space, look to the back of the crocheted piece, and find the next available chain space. So that's two, there's the two double crochets. We've got one in the corner. We're going to go into the chain space of and then chain one, go into the next chain space on this side, and the next chain space on this side. You can see I'm coming out of here, so I'm going to want to go into this one. Okay, into the next chain space, into the next chain space, and they line up pretty good. Chain space. And so we don't want to skip all the way over to the next corner. So what we're going to do is just go into the chain one, and then the threads that you use to sew the granny squares together, just go under like two of them, just to anchor that down, smooth out that side piece there. Okay, all the way up to the corner. Okay, and then when you get up to the corner, just go ahead, chain one, and then put 5 single crochets to the corner without any chain one spaces in between. After the 5th one, chain one, and then just go back into the spaces. This is along the top edge. This is where our handle is going to go. So we're not attaching the top edge to anything. We're just crocheting across it so we can do this all in one pass. And then 5 single crochets into this corner. No chain one spaces. Chain one, and now here we're going to attach it again to that next side, and then come down. So into that first single crochet and into the next chain space. Single crochet them together and then chain one. Right, into the next space, into the next space, single crochet, chain one, all the way down. And that corner piece will get anchored to the end piece here. Cut the yarn and weave in the ends. Okay, and then once your ends are woven in, you can turn it inside out. And then as you stitched these on, we're going to go ahead and stitch the bottom of this square down. But we'll start at the crochet portion and then still 4 squares in. And this is just 3 strands of DMC floss. So pick up a bit of the square. And then just whip stitch it until you get to the end here. Okay, so there's your little bag with a mesh bottom. All ready to go, except for we just need a handle. Okay, so for the handle, same yarn, same hook. In that second single crochet from the right in the corner, make a slip stitch and then chain 2, and that'll count as your first double crochet, and then double crochet in the last single crochet of the corner. Okay, so that's 2. 1 in between all these stitches, so in the chain space, 3, 4, and then we've got 1 in the first single crochet of the corner, and then the 9th one in the second single crochet of the corner. Right, and then chain 2, 1, 2, turn the work, and then just put a double crochet in each one, and as you go, now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 will go in here. So that chain at the beginning won't count as a double crochet. We're going to actually do 9 double crochets. There's 1, 2, 8, and then 9. Chain 2, turn the work, and then 9 double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Chain 2, turn the work, and keep going for 12 inches. 12 inches from here. All right, so then when that 12 inches is done, make sure the handle is laying flat, it's not twisted. Put the right sides together and then slip stitch it closed. Just insert the hook into the first double crochet, into the second double crochet on the back side, and just slip stitch it closed. The next stitch. And there you have your mesh bottom bag. Just weave this in here. Yeah, I really like how the handle, the double crochets on both sides, kind of remind me of the patterns that the sand makes. So added bonus there. And I discovered that while I'm not using the bag for harvesting mushrooms and finding rocks, I'm going to use this bag for storing my reading materials on harvesting mushrooms and finding rocks. So super bonus there. I can just hang this up in my trailer and it's ready to go when I'm out and about. Thank you so much for joining me this week, my week 5 of 8 weeks of out adventuring. Happy rock hunting, happy mushroom harvesting, happy stitching, happy trails, happy everything. Thanks again. I will see you next week. I am headed 20 miles east to go visit my good friend, Miss Kelly Day Fetter, and we are going to get weird in Portland. See you soon, Callie. Thanks again, everybody. See you next week.